What if I told you that in a single American family, one bloodline, 7 people died under mysterious circumstances across 3 generations? What if I told you the police called it bad luck, but the survivors? They called it something else entirely. They called it a curse. This is the story of the Sodder family, a real American family, whose house burned to the ground on Christmas Eve, 1945, and whose 5 children were never found. Not their bodies, not their bones, nothing. And what came after? A decades-long nightmare of cover-ups, secret letters, mysterious strangers, and a mother who refused to stop searching until the day she died. Stay with me, because this story, it goes way deeper than a house fire. All right, y'all, let's set the scene. Picture this. It's 1945, West Virginia, a small, tight-knit community nestled in the Appalachian Hills. And right in the middle of it all sits George Sodder, a proud Italian immigrant who came to this country with nothing but ambition and a whole lot of nerve. Dude was self-made. He ran a coal trucking business, built his family a beautiful home with his own 2 hands, and had himself 10 kids. 10. George and his wife, Ginny, weren't just living the American dream. They were the American dream. Now, George, he wasn't exactly the quiet type. He was outspoken. He had opinions. And one of those opinions, which he voiced loudly in the years leading up to this story, was that Mussolini was a straight-up tyrant. In a community where a lot of Italian Americans still had respect for the old country leadership, that made George some enemies. One night, not long before the fire, a stranger knocked on the Sodder family's door. George answered. The man on the porch looked at him dead in the eyes and said, and I'm paraphrasing here, "Your house is going to burn down, and your children are going to be destroyed." George thought it was just a drunk talking smack. He went back inside. He would regret that for the rest of his life. The night, everything changed. December 24th, 1945. Christmas Eve. The Sodder house is lit up. The kids are excited. There are gifts under the tree, the smell of food in the kitchen, and that kind of magical energy that only kids on Christmas Eve can bring into a room. George and Ginny put the little ones to bed around 10 o'clock. 5 of their children were still up a little later. Maurice, Martha, Louis, Ginny Jr., and Betty, ages ranging from 5 to 14. They were allowed to stay up a little later, playing with their new Christmas toys. George and Ginny went to bed. Now here's where it gets wild. At 12:30 in the morning, Ginny was woken up by the sound of a phone ringing. She answered it. A woman on the other end, a stranger, asked for someone who didn't live there, then laughed, and hung up. Ginny noticed the lights were still on downstairs. She assumed the kids had fallen asleep in the living room. She went back to bed. At 1 a.m., she was woken up again, this time by a loud bang on the roof. Then silence. Then, the smell of smoke. Ginny bolted out of bed. She screamed for George. By the time they got downstairs, the south side of the house was already engulfed in flames. They grabbed the 4 kids who were in the upstairs bedrooms, the ones that survived, and George ran back in for the other 5. But they were gone. He searched. He screamed their names. The smoke was choking him. He ran outside and tried to grab the ladder he always kept propped against the house to use as an emergency escape. It was missing. He tried to use his coal trucks to climb up to the second-floor windows. Both trucks wouldn't start. Not even a cough. Nothing. The Sodder house burned to the ground in 45 minutes. And when the fire was out, the 5 children were nowhere to be found. Now, here's where I need y'all to pay close attention, because this is where the story shifts from tragic to deeply suspicious. The fire chief, a man named F.J. Morris, conducted what he called an investigation. And his conclusion? The children's bodies were consumed entirely by the fire. Done. Case closed. But here's the thing. George Sodder did not buy that for one single second. And neither did the experts. See, a fire hot enough to completely incinerate 5 human bodies, leaving not one trace of bone, teeth, or flesh, would need to burn at around 1,400 to 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit for several hours. The Sodder house fire burned for 45 minutes. Later, investigators pointed out that during World War II, crematoriums in Germany, built specifically to destroy human remains, burned bodies for hours at extreme temperatures and still left behind bone fragments. So explain to me how a house fire in rural West Virginia left nothing. It gets worse. The fire investigator found what he claimed was a human heart in the rubble. But when a pathologist examined it, It wasn't burned at all. It was fresh, well preserved. And it turned out to be, I kid you not, a beef liver. A beef liver. Someone planted it. Someone wanted this case closed fast. And then, and this is the part that broke Jenny Sodder, a witness came forward and said that on the night of the fire, she saw a car full of children driving away from the Sodder house. The children were looking out the back window. One of them looked like her daughter. Y'all, the clues in this case don't add up. They stack up. Like a tower of red flags just teetering on the edge. Let's run through them. Red flag number 1, the phone lines. The Sodders' phone lines had been cut. Not burned. Cut. Deliberately severed before the fire started. That's why George couldn't call the fire department himself. A neighbor had to run and call it in. Red flag number 2, the missing ladder. George's ladder was always propped against the house. On the night of the fire? Gone. It was found later, thrown into a shallow ravine about 75 feet from the house. Somebody moved it. Red flag number 3, the trucks. 2 trucks that worked perfectly every single day. Both failed to start on the one night George needed them to reach his children's windows. A mechanic later discovered that the ignition wiring had been tampered with. Somebody didn't want George to save those kids. Red flag number 4, the life insurance man. In the months before the fire, a strange man came to the Sodder home posing as a life insurance salesman. He wandered through the house, pointed at the fuse box, and told George, quote, "This is going to cause a fire someday." George later described the man as someone he'd never seen before or since. Red flag number 5, the sightings. In the weeks and months after the fire, multiple people reported seeing children matching the descriptions of the Sodder kids at various locations. A woman running a tourist stop in Saluda, South Carolina, said she saw the kids with 2 men and 2 women, Italian-looking, who seemed nervous. The children looked scared. She called the police. Nothing happened. Red flag number 6, the FBI. George begged J. Edgar Hoover's FBI to investigate. They showed up. They poked around. And then they quietly left. With no findings. No report. No explanation. Now I want to take a minute and talk about Jenny Sodder. Because in every true crime story, we talk about the investigation, the suspects, the theories. But sometimes we forget about the human beings at the center. Jenny Sodder lost 5 of her children in one night. And for the rest of her life, literally until her final breath, she refused to believe they were dead. She and George built a roadside billboard on Route 16 in West Virginia. Giant photographs of the 5 missing children, what they looked like at the time of the fire, and what investigators estimated they might look like years later. The billboard stayed up for decades. They hired private investigators. They followed every lead, every tip, every rumor. They spent the equivalent of hundreds of thousands of dollars in today's money. And then in 1967, 22 years after the fire, Jenny received a letter. Inside was a photograph. The photograph showed a man who looked strikingly like her son Louis Sodder. Would have been in his mid-30s by then. On the back of the photo were the words, "Louis Sodder. I love, Brother Frankie. Illo Boys. A 90132. No return address. No explanation. Jenny hired a private investigator and sent him to follow up on the postmark, somewhere in the South. He was never heard from again. He disappeared. Jenny Sodder died in 1989. George had died years before her. They never found their children. They never got answers. And on Jenny's deathbed, she still believed her babies were alive somewhere. All right, so here's the part where we lay out the theories, because this case has layers, and I want y'all to think about this. Theory number 1, the mafia connection. George Sodder was outspoken about Mussolini. In Italian-American communities in the 1940s, some families had deep ties to organized crime and to fascist sympathizers who were not happy about guys like George running their mouths. Some researchers believe the fire was a mafia-style punishment, a warning that went too far. Or maybe it didn't go too far. Maybe the plan was always to take the children. If someone wanted to send George Sodder a message that would destroy him without killing him, taking his children would do it. Theory number 2, the children were kidnapped and raised by another family. This one is brutal, but hear me out. The witness sightings, the letter from Louis, the fact that no remains were ever found, all of it points toward one dark possibility. The 5 Sodder children may have been taken and raised by another family. Maybe they were told their parents were dead. Maybe they were too young to remember. Maybe some of them did try to reach out, like Louis, and were silenced. This kind of thing happened. It happened during World War II with children in Europe. It happened in America too, in cases that were covered up by local law enforcement with connections to powerful people. Theory number 3, local corruption. The fire chief who closed the case? He reportedly destroyed the remaining evidence from the site just days after the fire, before a proper investigation could be done. The local coroner ruled the children dead without a single piece of physical evidence. The FBI walked away. In a small Appalachian town in 1945, powerful men could make things disappear. And if someone in local government or connected to local government wanted this case shut down, it wouldn't have been hard. Was George Sauter targeted by someone with juice in the community? Someone he'd crossed? Someone who wanted to send a message? We may never know. The Sauter case is still officially unsolved. West Virginia authorities have never reopened the investigation. The billboard that George and Jenny put up came down years ago, but the story never died. True crime researchers, journalists, and amateur investigators have been picking at this case for decades. New documents have surfaced. New theories have emerged. In 2020, a researcher claimed to have traced the mysterious letter back to a small town in the Deep South, but hit dead ends in the public records. The grandchildren of George and Jenny Sauter, the descendants of the children who did survive, have spoken publicly about keeping the case alive. They want answers. They deserve answers. And here's what haunts me most about this entire story. If those 5 children were taken that night, if they survived, they would be in their 80s and 90s today. Or their children would be alive. Their grandchildren. Somewhere in America, there may be people walking around who are descended from the Sauter family, and they have absolutely no idea. So what do we take from this? The Sauter case isn't just a cold case. It's a warning about what happens when powerful people decide that the truth is inconvenient. When local authorities are more interested in closing a case than solving it. When a grieving mother's tears are met with silence instead of justice. Jenny Sauter spent 44 years fighting for her children. Fighting alone. Fighting while the system told her to move on. And she never stopped. That kind of love, that kind of determination, that's not something you can explain away with bad luck or coincidence. Someone knows what happened to those 5 children on Christmas Eve, 1945. And if you ask me, they're still out there. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think the Sauter children were taken? Was it the mafia? Local corruption? Something else entirely? Drop your theory in the comments below. I read every single one. And if this story hit different, if it made you think, if it made you feel something, hit that like button. It costs you nothing, and it helps this channel more than you know. And if you want more stories like this, real cases, real families, real mysteries that got buried, subscribe. Hit the bell, because I drop new stories every week, and trust me, the next one is even darker than this. I'll see you there.